Hello everyone, welcome back to this course. So far, we have learned how to build APIs with ExpressJS and have seen how routing, middlewares, and error handling come together to create a solid backend. Now, it's time to persist a data, and instead of using raw SQL queries directly, we will introduce an abstraction that makes database operations cleaner, type safe, and more maintainable. So in this lecture, we will talk about TypeORM, which is an ORM for JavaScript and has support for TypeScript too. We shall understand the benefits of using any ORM in a web application. At last, we will see the key features offered by the TypeORM and steps that are involved in setting it up in a Node.js project. So let's address a fundamental question. Why should we use an ORM like TypeORM or rather any ORM in the first place at all? When building an application, our backend logic interacts with the database constantly, which can include reading data, writing updates, inserting new records, or deleting old ones. This is typically what a web application does, and that is why ExpressJS is considered ideal for building applications which are IO heavy, which we have already discussed this in our previous lectures of this course. Now, talking about interaction with the database, traditionally this involves writing SQL queries directly. While we know SQL is powerful, it can quickly become repetitive, verbose, and even harder to maintain as the application scales. It also makes the code base more error prone, especially when transitioning between different environments or database types. ORMs solve this problem by abstracting the database logic into objects and methods. With TypeORM, we work with TypeScript classes instead of writing SQL directly. It reduces boilerplate, avoids duplication, makes the code more readable, and provides a single place for defining and maintaining our data models. It makes the code base cleaner, easier to maintain, and integrates well with the rest of the TypeScript application as well. So, what is TypeORM? TypeORM is a JavaScript or TypeScript based ORM, of course, object relational mapper, which allows us to interact with SQL databases like PostgreSQL, MySQL, SQLite, and even others using the object oriented features of TypeScript. It maps our TypeScript classes to database tables and lets us query the database using methods on those classes, avoiding the need to manually write and manage raw SQL queries. It is particularly popular in TypeScript projects because of its native support for decorators, static typing, and its seamless integration into modern backend workflows. Not only that, the TypeScript or the TypeORM provides support for a variety of databases, not only including relational databases, but for NoSQL as well. Okay, so talking about the features, TypeORM offers a wide range of features that make backend development smoother and more robust. First, it uses decorators like entity, column, primary generated column to define how a class maps to a database table. This makes our data model definitions expressive and declarative. It supports automatic schema synchronization, which means TypeORM can automatically create or update a database schema based on our entity definitions. This is a very powerful feature when we want to create and deploy our application for multiple testing environments. Though it is powerful, but this should be used with caution in production. TypeORM also supports migrations, a more controlled way of evolving our database structure over time without losing our existing data in the database, which is very helpful in production environments. It offers flexible loading strategies, including both eager loading, which means loading related entities by default, and the lazy loading, which means loading on demand. While using TypeORM, we can actually choose between the active record and the data mapper patterns. Active record, what it does is it attaches all operations directly to the entity class itself, whereas the other pattern, that is data mapper, which is also referred to as the repository pattern, it separates the operations through a repository which is more suitable for large applications. And all of this makes TypeORM a solid fit for complex and real world projects. Now, let's look at how to set up TypeORM in an ExpressJS project. This is going to be quite simple. The first thing we need to do is to install TypeORM package as a dependency in our project using the npm tool or command. This needs to be installed as a dependency and not a dev dependency, because this will also be required in the production environment. Post installing the TypeORM package, we will need to tweak a tsconfig.json file, since we are working in a TypeScript environment. We will need to enable two important options in a tsconfig.json file. One is emit decorator metadata. The other option is experimental decorators. These are necessary for TypeScript to understand the metadata TypeORM uses to connect our code to the database. Now, this is something that is not required if we are working in plain JavaScript or vanilla JavaScript environment, because we won't have a tsconfig.json file at all in such an environment. But since we will be working in a TypeScript environment, this is mandatory for us to do. Okay, so far we have installed the TypeORM package and made necessary adjustments in our project configuration to accommodate TypeORM. And now is time to know how to configure TypeORM in the project. This actually can be done using either an ORM config.json file, which is actually a legacy method right now, or using the newer approach, which is using a data source instance that is also defined in a .ts file. That means in a TypeScript based file. We are going to be using the latter one since it's more flexible as well as explicit. To connect to a database, we need to create a data source object and initialize it. This replaces the older, create connection approach. Sample data source configuration is already given in this slide. And once defined, we need to call, whatever the name of your data source is. For example, here it is app data source. You need to call the initialize method on this data source in your entry file, which is probably going to be index.ts in most of the projects at the time of starting the ExpressJS server. Though most of the configurations to the data source are self-explanatory, like the type of database you want to connect to, and the database credentials, etc. Apart from that, the synchronize true option here, it tells TypeORM to automatically generate the database schema based on our entities. Now, this is a great feature for development, but should always be false in production, where migrations are always the safer option. Now, the only thing remaining is the entities option. And this is where you tell TypeORM how to connect to the database and which all entities, which actually translates to actual database tables, it should be aware of. So what is an entity? An entity in TypeORM is a TypeScript class that represents a database table. Each instance of the class corresponds to a row in the table. A sample entity definition is also provided in this slide here. You can take a look at several decorators being used in this sample entity, and each of this decorator has a very specific use case. We shall be using many more such decorators when we start implementing hands-on project with the help of TypeORM and TypeScript. So looking at a few of the decorators being used in this code, first one is entity. It is used to mark the class as a table. Second one is primary generated column. It defines an auto-incrementing primary key. That means this ID column here in this table, or you could say, in this table, which actually exists in the database, will be the auto-incrementing column, or will also serve as the primary key. And the third one is the column decorator that you are seeing here. They just create normal columns of the table. And for now, these are the decorators that we have used in the sample code or in the sample entity. We can actually also customize these columns with the options like nullable, default, length, and many more such things. This class becomes the single source of truth for a data structure. And a typical web application has many such entities. And these entities are what we need to provide in the entities option of the data source configuration we looked at before. So coming back to the slide, we just left one option here, that was the entities, and this is going to be the place where you are going to be providing a list of all the entities that exist in your application. Now, let's look at how we actually interact with the database using TypeORM. Once the connection is live, TypeORM provides a repository for each entity. Think of a repository as a set of methods for reading and writing data for a particular table. A repository for any entity or a table can be easily created with the help of the data source, as also being shown in the current slide here. This slide also shows how one can perform an insert operation in the database using TypeORM. The same insert operation can be done in multiple ways using TypeORM's repository methods, and a couple of those methods are shown here in the slide. TypeORM repositories provide many other useful methods like find one, which you can use for fetching a single row against a given criteria from the database. There is a method called update, which you can use in order to update an existing row of the table. Then you also have methods like delete, which you can of course use to remove or delete a row from one of your tables. And there are many such more methods which we will explore as and when we will move into the implementation part. So all of these operations are strongly typed, and they are built on top of TypeScript classes, ensuring compile time safety and reducing errors. Repositories encapsulate all query logic, letting us focus on business functionality. So this brings us to the end of our TypeScript introduction. I hope you now understand what TypeORM is, why it's useful, how to configure it, how to create entities, and how to interact with the database through repositories. In the upcoming lectures, we will build APIs on top of this setup, combining ExpressJS routing with TypeORM operations. So that's all for this lecture, and thanks for watching.